A recent report submitted by Tesla to the Australian government has been revealed. And boy, did this report give a number of clues as to what Tesla is planning with Robotaxi. They talked about and described both remote operation and remote control. So will Tesla need a remote monitoring center with humans to take over in edge cases? And are they planning for it now? Let's review what Elon said about this when asked at the last shareholder meeting. In the report, Tesla also made the case that as they introduce autonomy and advanced driver assistance, the rules and regulations will need to change to emphasize safety over previous criteria. For example, should passengers still require a seatbelt if the car has autonomy and is lying down? So I've got Hans with us. Hans, this is something that you and I have been wanting to talk about. Here we are. First of all, this is Tesla now actually responding to a questionnaire from the government about regulations for this upcoming new world. It's happening, the conversation's happening, and some of the comments that Tesla made is revealing what they might plan. We'll go through a couple of those. Welcome, Hans.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
Hans has his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. And if you want to see deep dives on AI and full self-driving, that's where he does his greatest work, and really one of the people that can translate it to folks like me, what's actually happening. So this is right up your alley again. I love it that you're joining me for this. So this is a request by the Australian government asking, I guess, a variety of vendors what they should do about their policies and their regulatory framework as they consider autonomous vehicles coming into play. The Department of Infrastructure's Transport, Regional Development, Communication, and the Arts was the one that submitted a request, and then Tesla submitted a report. So there's like an 18-page. I did not copy all of it, but just to give you a sense of the answers that Tesla gave, and then we'll go to a summary of what they actually said in the whole article. But basically, what organization do you represent? This is Tesla. How suitable are the matters we propose to include in the safety management system? Should other matters be considered? And then Tesla said, it's our opinion that listed certification requirements are sensible, but will require further consideration and potentially specification. As an example, we suggest that data recording and sharing capability are defined in more detail so that ADSE is able to determine the regulatory expectations in terms of data types or clocks elements. So they're saying, hey, you need to be more specific about what you're asking. Further consideration needs to show how the confidential and privileged nature of the data. So they right off the bat start asking about the data. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole report here just to show you how they've answered this. So Lord Prittifalco did a good job. What he did was he took that document, that PDF, and he ran it through ChatGPT, and he gave basically a summary. So this is Tesla's submission to the Australian government, who's consulting on autonomous vehicle framework. And then this is Tesla's feedback on ADS. So Tesla aims to ensure that the regulatory framework in Australia is conducive to innovation, supports the safe deployment of autonomous vehicles, and facilitates the commercial expansion of their autonomous driving technologies. So this is the first thing. And I think in general, it really shows that Tesla's trying to tell these regulators, you got to focus first on safety as opposed to previous criteria, developing common standards for safe interaction between law enforcement, emergency vehicles, and autonomous driving systems, the importance of authenticating protocols, collaboration during incidents. Minor software updates should not require full recertification. That's going to be a concern because this is now software driven, and every time you need to get certification. So these are the questions that they're asking. But at the same time, they're concerned about unauthorized modifications of ADS. Significant modifications should be strictly regulated, subjected to recertification. So they're just being very specific about that. We'll get to the two big discussion points, which is first, should Tesla have remote operators, remote control, and then should Tesla be able to have, do you need to have seatbelts or lying down, those kind of things. Before we do that, what do you think about this topic about a regulator, Australia in this case, asking for opinions?
Well, it's definitely something that is going to happen. Like, this conversation is just one example of a number of conversations that are going to be had with regulators around the world who are all trying to figure out, what is it that we're going to do in order to live in a world where autonomous driving solutions actually provide potentially, autonomous ride hailing services. And so whether that's Tesla with their system for robotaxis, or whether that is Waymo, any of these other Chinese manufacturers that are trying to do something in this space. This is going to be something that has to be figured out. And right now, this is looking at national regulations for Australia, but ultimately, one of the things that struck me as is it reminded me of how the FAA was essentially, convened to really put in place regulations that eventually basically get adopted as international standards for the aviation industry. And not everything that the FAA does really applies that way, but there are certain elements of what they do that are. And I think that what Tesla's beginning to do is kind of nudge people in the direction like, hey, we need to have some common sense general frameworks that are really compatible across different countries that allow us to really figure out how, we're not to the point yet where everything about how this technology is going to work is already figured out. And so we need room to explore what is the best way to implement businesses on this, both from an ability to try different technology solutions, but different ways that they are held liable or not liable for different types of, like being held liable for a traffic accident is different than being held liable for the responsible handling of private customer data. And so there's, a whole number of different types of responsibilities that an operator might have. And this is them really beginning to explore the full, in context details of how to work that out with a government entity. And it's cool to see the way that they're thinking about it, and hopefully we can, like I said, broaden that out to where whatever the entities that really get there first on this, we need to probably take that and just turn it into a framework that's easy to for other governments to just plug and play, essentially adopt.
It's great to hear that Tesla is now starting to talk to regulators. And like you said, it's a brand new world. Okay. So this first topic here is is Tesla going to have remote control, remote operators? This is humans in a call center being able to control the car, operate the car, or understand what's going on in the car in case it gets caught in some sort of edge case and so forth. And to me, it's obvious that they needed to do this. And it sounds like talking to you previously, you also agree with that. But there's so many Tesla bulls who just kept saying, no, Tesla's not going to need to do this. Other car companies, I'll show you what Baidu's doing. They have it too. But if you listen to Elon himself, he talked about it. So let's go ahead and play that video clip of when he was asked this question at the annual shareholder meeting.
Hey, Elon, on your right.
Sorry, yeah.
My name's Keanu, a longtime fan of your brand and company and everything. I'm wondering, when you take the driver out of the seat for the driverless car, how do you plan to handle interventions, which I'm sure will happen at some rate, even if they're rare?
Yeah, so clearly we want to make sure that if there's no driver in the car, the probability of a severe intervention is extremely low. We want to make sure that the car is extremely cautious around vulnerable road users like cyclists or pedestrians. So really, we'd want the probability of hurting a pedestrian or cyclist to be incredibly low, way lower than someone driving a car. Now, then there are interventions that happen where the car is simply gets stuck down a one-way street with a crazy construction situation. But in which case it'll basically phone home and say, "Help! I'm stuck." And then I think we can probably solve a lot of these things just by, remoting into the car and kind of steering it like a giant RC car. That's what I'm guessing. That's what I think we'll do.
Okay. So he said it, right? He said we're going to just, remote control into the car. That's what I'm guessing. Now, so it's just shocking to me that some people think that won't happen. So what was your interpretation of that?
Well, yeah, I definitely would agree with you that this is obviously something that not only can happen, it almost essentially has to happen. Cruise and Waymo, both have systems in place for this exact type of thing, because once you start operating a fleet like this in the real world, then you have to deal with all of the edge cases that the real world brings. That's the data challenge that Tesla's trying to solve. But, at the first examples of, really operating this fleet at scale, they're not going to have all of the edge cases solved. Ultimately, I think that it's likely that we will eventually eliminate the need for these human remote operators and remote monitors over a long enough period of time. But at the beginning of the rollout of this technology, it's inconceivable that we won't need to have some human judgment that is plugged in at least sometimes in some situations. And that's what this is essentially carving out an ability to have humans in the loop as necessary. Obviously, like Elon said, they want to make sure that this is happening almost not at all. The thing that we learned about Cruise was they were having, more drivers necessarily than cars that were there able to take over in case of these edge case scenarios. You certainly don't want something like that. You probably want to be able to operate this where you have one remote monitor or one remote operator for 100 cars or 1,000 cars or 10,000 cars. And so they're trying to do everything that they can to make sure that the FSD system that grows into this Robotaxi system will be able to have very, very few errors. But as anyone who has developed any software knows, you have to have a system in place for error handling, and that's what remote monitoring and remote operation will provide.
So yeah, this photo is from Baidu. They have a self-driving capability and feature and operation in China. It's called Apollo Go, right? And they have these people that are, playing it like a car. They could actually drive this car if they want to. And what we discovered with Cruise is that, I don't know what their actual stat was, but every 2 to 3 miles, there had to be some sort of intervention by a human teleoperator who comes in. And so when people come into these cars and they see that there's no one there, they go, oh my God, this car is driverless. There's nobody there. They think, oh my God, look how far ahead Cruise and Waymo and Apollo is. But what they don't realize is that there's operators. We don't know how, the reason why it costs so much money that they can't get their business model set up right is because they probably have 1 per 1 or 1 for every 5 cars. Tesla's going to do this, but if they can have very little, just for that edge case, he said, when it gets stuck in the street, what do you do? That's what this is for. So this is what this is, and it's going to have to be. It's just probably going to be a lot less people. And the question is, maybe even Tesla won't be doing this. It might be outsourced to a third party. And so that's what this answer, their answer to the Australian government was, Tesla suggests that the responsibility for safe remote operation should be defined through agreements between ADS entities and third-party operators. And then they also differentiate, Tesla did, between remote monitoring and remote control, recommending clear legal frameworks for each. I don't know exactly the difference are. Let's look into it a little bit more. Tesla believes that remote operators should have a valid driver's license and no recent criminal record, emphasizing the importance of training provided by ADS entities. So ADS entities like Tesla should, if they have a remote operator, they should, clearly be able to drive. Remote operation and licensing highlights their desire for a flexible yet safe regulatory framework for autonomous driving. That responsibility for remote operation should be clearly defined through contracts between companies like Tesla and also third parties. So they may use it and license it to other third parties. Who's going to do this for them? This flexibility is based on specific business models. So this example, this is ChatGPT looking at that document, putting this out, saying, imagine Tesla sells autonomous trucks to a logistics company. The logistics company might not have the expertise to manage the remote operation of these trucks. So they contract a specialized third-party operator who provides the remote operating services. This third-party operator would watch over the trucks as they drive autonomously, stepping in if something unusual happens. Tesla suggests that the legal responsibility for any issues during a remote operation should be clearly outlined in the contract between Tesla and that third-party operator. Who's responsible? Now, Tesla differentiates between remote monitoring. They define that as where operators assist the ADS in decision-making and remote control, where operators directly manage the vehicle. They argued that these two activities require different regulatory approaches, with remote control needing stricter oversight. So, yeah, tell me what you think they mean by remote monitoring versus remote control.
I mean, it sounds to be something as simple as, does the remote person have a steering wheel and pedals and take over actually driving this car, even though they're not present in the vehicle, versus the, someone just behind a computer screen who doesn't necessarily have the ability to take over the steering inputs, the brake pedal, the accelerator, and they're just there as someone who is helping the system make decisions when it runs up against the limit of its understanding of a situation specifically. So that, it could be something like the system phones back to the remote monitor, not the remote operator, and says, "Hey, I am looking at the situation. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I have the option to do nothing, or which would probably be something that would end up getting basically escalated to a remote operator. Or I could take path A, path B, or path C. Please tell me which of these 4 options is the best option in this scenario." And that person says, right here, you just need to take path C. And I think that's probably the role of what a remote, not a remote operator, but a remote monitor would do, is just help it make those decisions without ever actually, pressing an accelerator pedal, taking over a steering wheel, anything like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this shows you that Tesla is realizing that they might not need as many remote control people as other companies do. Like he gave the example, if the car goes into a one-way street and it's a dead end, well, you got several options. You wanted to do a three-way, can you do a three-point turn, or can you just reverse back out? So somebody says, just reverse back out. Maybe it's just going to ask the passenger, what do you want me to do? What should I do next? And the operator says, so that's the remote monitor, rather than the remote control, right? Because Tesla's cars, you can talk to it and teach it and tell it what to do. So,
well, and remember what the conversation happening here between Tesla and Australian authorities is about liability and responsibility. Who is responsible? If a remote monitor says, do this, and then the car makes a mistake and it runs into some property and damages something, who's responsible for that damage? Is it the autonomous driving solution who just went off of the decision that a monitor made? I think it's a much harder thing to decide on in that situation than, hey, a remote operator took over control and then ran over somebody's mailbox. Like in that case, the remote operator is clearly the one who should be held responsible for running over the mailbox. In the situation where it's a remote monitor who said, you need to do the 3-point turn, well, obviously, doing the 3-point turn, the car itself should be responsible for doing that 3-point turn without running over the mailbox. And so these are the types of, nitty gritty situations where all of that's going to have to be pretty much worked out, or there needs to be a system in place to decide who pays for damages when something wrong happens.
But also, like you were saying, right, that this is sounding like Tesla may not want to do this themselves. They may want to partner with a third party and offer to them. So Lord Purifaco asked ChatGPT, who's read the document, do you think this implies that Tesla plans to have third-party remote operators as opposed to doing it in-house? Or am I interpreting this incorrectly? And then ChatGPT said, by reading the PDF, it said, the document suggests that Tesla is open to the possibility of third-party remote operators. It doesn't explicitly state that this is their definitive plan. Instead, Tesla seems to be advocating for flexibility in how remote operations are managed by emphasizing a need for clear contracts between companies like ADS, entities like Tesla, and other third-party operators. They're preparing for scenarios where either approach could be viable. So it doesn't confirm they can use it. So that was the final thing, was about they're likely going to partner, right?
Well, yeah, I think that ultimately, just complete opinion here, but it seems likely that Tesla not only will at scale, like they will probably have remote monitors and remote operators who work directly for Tesla during the development of all of this technology. We know that Elon loves vertical integration, and those two things provide valuable data that they will need to use in order to build out this robotaxi fleet. That said, once this reaches scale, I don't anticipate that Elon will want to keep those functions in-house. That once the system is good enough, you're essentially operating call centers of people whose only job is to sit there and punch buttons or turn steering wheels. We've already seen Tesla go through a process like this with human AI data labelers, that we did employ a lot of human data labelers. Now we employ very few because we've managed to automate most of that. That if at all possible, Tesla gets out of the business of something that essentially ends up looking like a call center. And I think that's probably the likely situation here. And so they're thinking about this and preparing for a future world where at scale, they don't want to be in this business and they want other people to do it for multiple reasons. A, they just don't like that business as a business that's a core competency of theirs, that business being remote operation monitoring. But B, they also don't necessarily want to have the liability of that. And so while they're saying, hey, we're going to define what are these agreements that exist between Tesla and a remote operator or Tesla and a remote monitor, the purpose of doing that is to say, okay, there's a lot of things that could happen that could go wrong that Tesla doesn't want to be liable for. And so this is a way for them to prepare for shielding themselves from a lot of liability for things that could go wrong. And I think that, when you're operating at scale, you really have to think about that a lot more. And it allows Tesla to really focus on what they do best, which is let's just build the software and the hardware. And that's what we're good at. That's what we want to focus on. We don't necessarily, and I think this also kind of implies furthermore that they don't really want to operate these fleets themselves at scale either. They will probably do some Tesla owned and operated robotaxis. But, if you think about what does this look like in the limit, it's probably less than 10%, maybe less than 5%, maybe even less than 1% of all robotaxis in, an eventual completely saturated future that are owned and operated by Tesla, or the vast majority of those vehicles are actually owned and operated by some sort of a fleet operator. And then that fleet operator is contracted with, or, who knows if they own or operate the remote monitoring and remote operation services to whatever degree that's necessary or not. But they just want this part of the complexity of running this business at scale to be something that exists outside the company.
Yeah, very interesting. Good points. Okay, the next big thing that was revealed by this submission by Tesla to the response of the Australian government is whether or not people should be able to lie down. Do they still need to wear seatbelts? And could the seats swivel? Could they actually be positioned different ways as well? This was hinted at here. So let's take a look at this. There's a section called Human User Obligations. Tesla opposes strict seating requirements when ADS is engaged, arguing that flexibility in design is crucial for innovation. They recommend that safety obligations focus on automation state changes rather than physical seating arrangements. So instead of saying you must be sitting in front this way, just say, there should be which is safe. As long as it's safe, they should agree that that's okay. Jason from Tech AU pointed out that the Australian regulators, that Tesla wants them to allow vehicles with seats that can fully recline, conducive with sleeping, and rotate away from simply looking forward. Robotaxis are going to be fire. So this is the section in the response. At this time, we do not believe that vehicle control or seating design are an appropriate determinator for related user obligations, and we are concerned that overly conservative requirements will provide a burden on innovation vehicle design. Fully reclining or rotating seats or designs without forward-oriented seats are imaginable. Vehicle designs where only a center seating position for heavy-duty vehicles are foreseeable, just a center seating position. Even in the context of dual-mode vehicles, fallback or direct control can be provided by remote operators. So even the dual mode, so that's my car being able to use fallback or direct control capability can be provided by remote operators. So why do you need to worry about, do you need to have a human sitting in front Do they need a seatbelt? Yeah, so that's that part right there. So this is a version of a Zoox, autonomous vehicle, and you can see that they're using LiDAR. Now, Zoox designed it this way. And I've been saying that I think that Tesla will release a robotaxi that's more like this, right? Easy to walk in. And in this case, you probably have swivel seats that are two facing each other. You can either sit apart from each other, back to back. You can sit front to front. You can change the thing, but there's lots of room inside. That gives you a lot of flexibility of how do you make this mobile lounge work for you? What's your thoughts about what you saw with the regulators' answer?
Yeah, I definitely advocate, with Tesla on this, that we have the ability to experiment with different things. Tesla saying that distinction should be made based on who is responsible for driving. And so if the responsibility for driving is placed on either remote monitors or the self-driving technology, then the humans inside shouldn't necessarily be constrained to facing forward. I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. I think another thing that you could also factor into this potentially is, what is the maximum speed of this vehicle? And I think that's one of the ways that some of the like Waymos or the Zooks, these types of things get around this, is that they just only operate in environments where they're never traveling, more than 30 or 40 mile an hour. And the safety implications of a vehicle that's traveling at those lower speeds are just different than when you're traveling at higher speeds, not only, from safety, but then there's also other impacts that vehicles that have to go faster deal with from an aerodynamic standpoint as well. So I think speed and aerodynamics are going to be an additional factor that Tesla's definitely going to have to contend with some of their robotaxi platforms, maybe not all. And I think those things would definitely push us away from a vehicle that looks exactly like the Zoox. But you could see something that is similar that, Tesla, like if you think about the concepts that we've seen for the vehicles that are going to travel around in Boring Company tunnels, well, of course, those look a lot more like the Zoox, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And so, I think it's going to be one of the concepts that we see Tesla develop, but it probably won't be the only one.
Perfect. So this was good information that came out from this submission. I mean, you can't take everything for like that means anything, but it's something. Hints that this is what they're asking for, right? Regulation allow us that flexibility, remote monitoring, remote operations. If we decide to do that, what would be the legality if we have a third party do that for us? Can we not focus on requiring seatbelts required if you're facing forward only, instead focus on safety in terms of seat flexibility that gives you the most? So that's a few of the things that came out of this. So that's very interesting. Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm just excited to see what some of these guardrails end up being that are put in place. And kind of like I alluded to at the beginning, I hope that we can adopt a relatively standard set of regulations around this internationally, and that it can speed up instead of slow down the overall implementation of this technology. Because I think that ultimately this is a huge win for humanity, because it will improve safety and it will reduce cost at the same time, and it'll increase access to transportation for people. And technology is really one of the only things that, when done successfully, can give people better, faster, and cheaper all at the same time. The golden dream of autonomous driving technology is giving everyone better, faster, cheaper access to transport. And so we have to get from here to there. It's going to be kind of a choppy and messy thing. These regulatory environment challenges are one of those obstacles that we have to overcome. But if we can collaborate together, I think that we can navigate all of those challenges in a way that does provide humanity with better, faster, cheaper transport. And that's the goal.
Yeah. I think the other big one is productivity. If you're a city, a country that proves autonomy, you're going to have much, people are going to be able to, and if you agree with these regulations, they can work. They don't have to be focused on the street. They can be turned around. They can have, computers in front of them or something like that. The average person spent 101 minutes per day driving. So that's 38,000 hours driving a car per year. Oh, in a lifetime. So that's a lifetime. So in a year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive GDP win on multiple fronts, whether it's just giving back people their time, but then if you also take into account the fact that, the truck, like the cost for driving vehicle or, trucks to transport stuff around, a lot of that is the labor that it takes to drive that vehicle. Yeah. And while I definitely it's a difficult problem to think about, okay, how do we provide gainful employment to all the people that currently, make a living from driving semi trucks? It is a benefit to the country as a whole to have
cost of goods,
cheaper transport. So cost of goods for everything, people that live in food deserts, if their food could be cheaper because the truck that brought their stuff to them was an autonomous truck instead of driven by a human, that's really good thing for, someone who's right on the edge of being able to afford good quality food or not. And so you kind of have to weigh the benefits and the drawbacks of these things together and try and balance it all out. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about this topic, is because it is important. It touches a lot of lives. It has a lot of potential benefits. And we also need to be mindful of, okay, well, what are the challenges and what are the struggles that are going to come as the unintended consequences of the things that we do as well. Yeah.
We're getting very close every day. Here's another sign that we're getting close. Thank you so much, Hans. Follow him on his YouTube channel. Check him out. Hans C. Nelson. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.